Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see everybody here. Welcome back to our next Financially Empowered Women event. We're super happy to have everybody here. It's nice to be back together. We are excited. This is our last event of 2025, which feels kind of crazy. So as we are beginning our planning for the next year, if there's anything that you want to hear us talk about or topics that you want us to cover, be sure to let us know either in the chat, send me an email, and we're going to start putting together our 2026 plans. So keep your eye out for that, and we'll be sending that out soon. I really just have one announcement before we jump into our presentation tonight. We are talking again about WCI Con, which feels crazy. It's coming back up before too long. But tomorrow is the last day for our early bird pricing. So early bird is the lowest pricing that you are going to see for the conference. So if you've been thinking about coming, if you've been on the fence, this is the moment for you. So you'll save $300 on your in-person ticket. Come hang out with us in Las Vegas. It's always such a great experience, so much fun. And we love our in-person few happy hour. I usually cry, so you'll get to see that. It's a great week. So if you want to come, this is the best time to buy your ticket. It's on sale through the end of tomorrow. You can get that at whitecoatinvestor.com/WCICON. Okay, just one quick reminder for our structure tonight. We are not going to be doing breakout groups tonight. So while our presenter is going through her slides and talking to us, if you have any questions that you want her to answer, throw those in the chat and we will tackle it after her presentation. Like we said, this is your big chance to get the Q&A. So don't hold back. Throw your questions in there. We'll collect those for you, and then we will read them and get those answered. So, okay, without any further ado, I'm excited to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. Elisa Chiang is an oculoplastic surgeon as well as a life and money coach. She started learning about investing and finances during medical school, and she has been following the White Coat investor community since residency. She's also presented at WCI Con for the last 3 years. She's been a contributor on the blog. And tonight, Elisa is going to be presenting to us on how society has influenced our money beliefs. And then we're going to follow that up with some discussion and some coaching. And it's going to be a great night. We're so glad to have Elisa here with us. And Elisa, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. So I know we got a lot of people here, probably from all over the country. If people want to say like where they're from, I live in the east suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, and most recently worked in Sioux Falls. So just to get a sense, and I do want this to be somewhat interactive. I know we've got somewhat big group here, so we can't necessarily bring people on so much, but please be active in the chat. I'm going to try to keep the chat up so I can see what's going on as well while I present, which of course is a little bit of multitasking. So Women and Wealth, Deconstructing Social Narratives for Financial Empowerment. And just a few disclosures. So I am a physician. I'm a life and money coach. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, though. And I'm the founder of Grow Your Wealthy Mindset. I don't have any other financial disclosures, and nothing's really pertinent to this particular talk. All right, so let's talk about our thoughts on money. Our beliefs really come from our exposure to the world, and it really begins at a very young age. It starts when we're young. It starts at the home. It starts with what our parents say about money. So I'm going to share some stories, my own personal experience. And I do want you thinking about your own stories, and hopefully you'll be willing to share them in the chat as well. So my parents really taught me to save and be frugal with money. We had to save for what we wanted. So, for example, when I wanted a new bike when I was in middle school, I had to save for half of it, and my parents would pay for the other half. And of course, as a middle schooler, I'm not old enough to get like a real job. So that meant saving money that I might get from my grandparents for my birthday, or kind of doing other side jobs in the neighborhood. So I would walk other people's dogs or do pet sitting when people were out. As I was older, I started doing babysitting. But even young, like I remember my sister and my god sisters, we'd go around the neighborhood and we'd ask people if we could rake the leaves on their lawn and we'd like ask for like $1 each of us. It was really like kind of child slave labor. But, it was really instilled in me that you had to earn money, you had to work hard for money. And so as I'm sharing my stories again, think about what stories you learned when you were growing up. Like, what were your first interactions with money? Did your parents ever give you money, or did you actually have to earn all the money that you got? Were you gifted money? What did you experience from your parents about money? And then we're also, of course, influenced by our friends. What our friends say about money, or even not what they specifically say, but it may also just be what they have, what they showed off. I went to a school that was predominantly Jewish, over half the population. I don't know, probably around 75% Jewish. And so around the winter holidays, a lot of my Jewish friends celebrated Hanukkah. Well, Hanukkah, there's 8 nights of Hanukkah, and there was a tradition that they would get a gift every single night of Hanukkah. And unlike Christmas, where you traditionally, open your gifts on, for us, Christmas Day, some people, I guess, do it Christmas Eve, but Christmas always fell during winter break, whereas Hanukkah might actually be before winter break. So then during school, people would talk about what gift they got the previous evening. They would potentially bring whatever they got to school. And so it seemed to me that, wow, like lots of people in my school got a lot more toys over the holidays, and that they just had more. And that wasn't something that anyone said specifically, but it was just something that I thought, because like, oh, like they're getting 8 presents throughout the Hanukkah season. And so to my child self, like I was always jealous of not being Jewish and getting presents for 8 days in a row. And of course, what we see in the media influences us. For us, when we were young, it was probably more TV, movies, and magazines. But nowadays, for our kids, it can be a lot of like social media. So I know my nephews, they're on YouTube all the time. They're watching YouTube shorts. They love watching those videos where kids like open up presents, like these revealing kind of videos. And depending on their reactions, like they kind of want like what these other kids show and what these other kids want. And of course, the stories we hear influence us on what we think about money, as well as our own lived experience. And this is also kind of generational. So depending on when people live and what goes on through their lifetime will greatly affect what they think about money. So if we think about our grandparents who might have gone through the Great Depression, that certainly impacted how they felt about money. For our parents who kind of lived during the time of like super high double-digit inflation, I mean, that really influenced what they thought about money. And depending on what time frame you are and what stage of your life, when different recessions happen or different booms happen. So when I graduated undergraduate, it was right after the dot-com bubble had burst. And so the year before me, my peers were all like getting great jobs, like making like a ton of money. Like there were even some people who were dropping out of school to take these 6-figure jobs. And then when it came to me graduating, I graduated from Caltech with an engineering degree. There were very few jobs available, and they were not paying anything near what people were accepting the year before, when the dot-com bubble was really explosive, and in the tech world was just paying gobs of money to new graduates. So I thought we'd talk about some common thoughts about money. And what I did is I just Googled, I asked Google for some common thoughts about money, and here are some things that came up. So money is the root of all evil. So I just want, if you can put in your chat box, yes, if this is something you heard when you were growing up, if this was a mantra, maybe you heard it from your parents, or maybe you heard it at church, or maybe you heard it at school. Money is the root of all evil. I'm seeing some yeses in the chat box. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty common thing. I didn't necessarily hear it a lot when I was young, but, it's certainly a phrase I've heard. And it actually comes straight from the Bible. But the Bible actually states, for the love of money is the root of all evil, meaning that it's not money in itself that's evil, but it's the excessive desire for money or greed that really leads to negative consequences. And there's more money, more problems. Who kind of remembers? So there was actually a song by American rapper The Notorious Big that was released in 1997, More Money, More Problems. So 1997 was when I graduated undergrad, or when I graduated high school. And it's the idea that, maybe having money can actually cause different problems or other problems. And it might even be used as an excuse for a reason not to build wealth, not to necessarily have a lot of money because of the problems that comes with having more money. And then money can't buy happiness. Who actually believes that? Well, it's really interesting because there's actually a lot of research that goes into the correlation between money and happiness. And there was actually a landmark study by Daniel Kahneman and Agnes Deaton in 2010 that came to the conclusion that once people earn about $75,000 a year, that increased income has no impact on increasing happiness. And so this was really held up in as a thing that's like, oh, okay, once you have your basic needs met, you have enough money for food, shelter, security, that having more money doesn't actually increase happiness. And there was another study in 2008 that was published in Nature Human Behavior that found that actually the income of 105,000 was sufficient for what they called ideal life satisfaction in North America for a single person. And then they found the scale was that, so a family of four, that number was 210,000. That was calculated by taking the square root of 4, which is 2, and multiplying that by that 105,000. So if you have a family of 9, the square root of 9 would be 3. And so it'd be 3 times 105. So 315,000 would be sufficient for a family of 9 in North America to have what they called ideal life satisfaction. And so that seemed to correlate with the original study. But then later on, there was actually another study done by Matt Killingsworth. And what he did was he actually set up a design where people got pinged on their smartphone and they reported their happiness right in the moment of that ping. And so he collected millions of data points from hundreds of thousands of people. And he, in his research, actually did not find that happiness plateau that was previously reported. And so Killingsworth and Kahneman actually ended up doing a collaboration to try to actually see okay, is there this plateau or can more money actually increase happiness? And this is where study design becomes so important. And without getting all the nitty gritty details, basically with Killingsworth's study, there was a huge range of happiness that could be reported. Whereas with the original Kahneman study, people really maxed out very quickly. There were only 4 questions. And if you answered yes on all 4 questions, you were already at max happiness. So a lot of people answered yes for all 4 questions. And so his study actually really looked more at people who were less happy. And so he was actually finding more unhappiness, that lack of money correlates with unhappiness. And then looking at the study sample from Killingsworth, he actually found if you looked at the bottom 15% of unhappy people, then you could find a plateau where after a certain amount of money didn't increasing money did not bring more happiness to the people who were kind of at the low end of the happiness spectrum. But that there are people who know, who have realized how to use money to increase their happiness, and so they can continue to increase happiness with more money. But in the end, the effect of happiness, the effect of money on happiness is actually relatively small. There are other things that really affect happiness more than money. And so that's the good news, is that as physicians, we typically do have enough income and money that lack of money should not be causing us unhappiness. What about money doesn't grow on trees? So that was something that I heard a lot when I was a kid. That was definitely something my father specifically said, that money doesn't grow on trees. And so, here's the idea, is that money is not easy to come by. And there's an underlying thought that you shouldn't waste money, right? But I also like to point out that this kind of depends on your upbringing. If you grew up in an apple orchard or an almond tree farm, then in a way, money did grow on trees, right? If you had a great apple harvest and those apples were sold for money, they literally translates into, yes, the resources that the trees grow and produce actually do bring in income and money and potentially wealth if the farm is doing well. So this is where I like to say, like, you've got to question things, and our thoughts about money really come from our background and our environment and what we experience. And then there's the thought that money talks, and that's the idea that money gives power. If someone has a lot of money, then they have a lot of power, or they can use their money to influence people and get power through that influence. It's like the other golden rule: he who has the gold makes the rules. And then time is money. So, I say time is really a valuable resource, in a way, a resource more valuable than money, because in the end, everyone gets the same amount of time. Like, you can't get more time, but you can earn more money. And so you can, in some ways, use money to buy back time. Like, you could hire someone to clean your house so that you're not cleaning it yourself. So you're not spending that time cleaning. You can now spend that time doing something else. But in the end, like, when time passes, like, there's no way to get back that time. So to me, time is actually more valuable than money. So I want to go more into the historical context as well. And I like to talk about Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So I was definitely a Jane Austen fan, and I've read all of Jane Austen's book. And Pride and Prejudice was one of my favorite books when I was young. And I think I first read maybe even middle school, but I've definitely read it multiple times. Um, if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice or seen the BBC TV series or watched one of the movie adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, it's about the Bennet family. And so Mr. and Mrs. Bennet had 5 girls. And Mrs. Bennet is preoccupied with marrying her daughters. And especially in this case, Jane is like her loveliest daughter. And so she wants to marry them well. And what does marrying them well mean? It means basically marrying them to someone who has a lot of money. And the reason why they're in this situation is because they live in a country estate, and Mr. Bennet is a gentleman. This is Regency England, but the estate is entailed and can only be uh, inherited by a male heir. And so Mr. and Mrs. Bennet had just planned that they would have a boy, and that boy would take care of his sisters. And so that would secure the Bennet fortune. But of course, after 5 children, all being girls, at some point they realized that a boy was not coming. And now, in order for their daughters to actually be able to be cared for through the rest of their lives, they now needed to depend on another man, because once their father was gone, they needed to have a husband who could take care of them. And so the rest of the story is really about essentially marrying off the daughters of the Bennet family. And again, this is not like some fairy tale world. This was Regency England, and this really was a reflection of what the times were like at that time. And so really, the traditional role of woman has been at the home, and that has been the case for centuries of human existence. And specifically, there was a legal doctrine known as coverture, where a married woman in British North America colonies, which of course later becomes the United States, has minimal legal existence apart from her husband. So basically, even a woman who might have a large fortune or a large dowry, that fortune would belong to her husband once she's married. Basically, women got money from men, either their father or their husband. And in fact, married women could not own property or enter contracts or even a salary in their own name. And that didn't start changing until 1839. And in 1839, it was only one state in the country where there started to be rights for women. And it took another 50 years for those rights to expand across the country. So if a woman was married, her whole financial identity was assumed by her husband. A woman got money she needed from her husband to manage the household, and that was all the money that she had. And, it really wasn't until fairly recently that a woman could get a bank account on her own or get a credit card in her own name or get loans in her own name. In fact, it wasn't until 1974 with the passage of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act that women could get their own credit cards, could get their own bank accounts. So that act specifically made it illegal for creditors to discriminate against any applicant based on sex, marital status, race, religion, national origin, age, or because they receive public assistance. So all this really goes into our current society thoughts that women don't really, they may manage money, but they're managing their household and they may manage the money for their household, but that they receive money either from their father or their husband. Other people give women money. And so now that may even be translated into like when you earn a salary, well, your boss is giving you that money. That also goes into the gender pay gap, right? So here we have a virtual room of women physicians. And so I want to also ask in the chat, so how many of you earn more than your husbands, right? I know a lot of women physicians are married to male physicians, but a lot of women physicians are married to men in other professions. And even some are married to men who are stay-at-home dads. So my husband is a high school teacher. From the time point that I became an attending, even working part-time, I make significantly more than my husband. Yeah, and I see a lot of people say that they do earn more than their husband. And so for those of you who do earn more than your husband, how much more of the household work or childcare work do you do? Is it more than your husband, equal, or less? In most households, even if the woman earns more, she participates more in the household work as well as the child rearing. And that's actually true. So if a man and woman, if they both work, the woman, no matter if she makes more or less than her husband, typically spends more time and effort and energy on household work or household care or child care than her husband. It's only in the situation where the husband does not work at all that the husband will tend to do more household and child care work than the woman in the family. Yeah, and people are agreeing, right? Like, even though we earn more, we might still end up doing more of the household work. Now, I will say in my household, my husband actually does more of the actual household work. Like, I do the cooking and he does the cleaning. And there's definitely a lot more cleaning, because just my cooking causes a lot of cleaning. But I actually take care more of the finances. So we're actually a little bit more flipped in our kind of gender roles. But typically, it's been the man's role to really take care of the family financially. And this has really only changed in the last few decades. A woman's income has been seen as supplemental, and the man's the income that takes care of the family, and the woman just helps out. And there was the time where, often women would stop working once there was children. She may be working until the children were born, but there was this idea that once the children were born, that she would be at home and that she would take care of her husband and take care of the children. And obviously for us as women physicians, we spent a lot of hard earned to become physicians. And so even if we, have come back at work in order to be able to be there for our household, we are still, part-time work as a physician is like full-time for other professions. And so in 1850, only about 15% of women actually worked outside the home. And these jobs would typically have been things like nurses and governesses. Even if a woman worked in a factory, it would be likely as a seamstress or they'd be working on apparel. So basically, women who worked outside the home were still doing domestic work in the homes of others or in a factory doing still kind of domestic-based work. It still had the implication that women still were in caregiving roles even when they were working outside the home. It really only became normal for women to work during World War I because of men now being off to war. And so the factory still had to run. And so that was really the first time in the United States where it became acceptable for women to do work that was considered men's work. And so we still have a gender pay gap, depending on the study. It could be anywhere between 18 to 22%. It seems to fall generally around that 20% range. It can be more in different fields and less in other fields. But in general, women are still the first to give up their work in order for the caregiving responsibilities at home. And we certainly saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. So between March and April of 2020, 3.5 million mothers with school-age children left work, lost their jobs, or exited the labor market. And the percentage of women who lost their jobs was 30% higher than the number of men in 2020. So, I mean, that is still pretty recent, and we still see, women really take over when it comes to taking care of the kids at home. And so, again, in the chat box, I want to see if you have children, how much of it ended up kind of being your responsibility more so than your husband to take care of the kids at home when schools closed and people were doing online schools. Okay, that's great. Someone says that it was equal, but someone else said it's 95% was her. Yeah. So, and it typically is the woman who, and not always. I mean, there's certainly, I do know situations where the dad is a stay-at-home dad and either doesn't work or is part-time and may actually have spent more of the time at home. But in general, it really is women. And, we're saying that like even with professional women as physicians, it often was us as well. So race also really contributes to the pay gap. According to this one study, the pay gap is higher for every single race other than Asians. Interestingly, Asian women actually made 97 cents to the dollar compared to white men. So kind of a minimal pay gap there. But if we look at white women, it was 79 cents to the dollar. So again, around that 20% range. But other races definitely fare worse. So Black and African Americans make 63 cents to the dollar, Hispanic or Latino origin, 56 cents to the dollar. So almost half of what a white male makes for equivalent work. So what about in medicine? What is the gender pay gap in medicine? I will say that I had a very heated argument with a colleague of mine. I was in the OR, and so I was talking to the anesthesiologist, and I don't even know why this came up, but he was so adamant that there was no pay gap in medicine. But according to Elisa 2020 U.S. Census Bureau, the gender pay gap in medicine falls around 26%. And this occurs within a specialty. So this is not just based on specialty choice. This isn't because more women go into primary care or like pediatrics, which traditionally has less earning potential than surgical subspecialties. But even within any given specialty, there is still this gender pay gap. And there was actually one really large study that looked at 10,241 physician salaries across 24 public medical schools. And the difference existed even accounting for age, experience, specialty, faculty rank, research productivity, and clinical revenue. So surgical subspecialties show the largest gender differential, which I don't find surprising. And the gap was actually largest for full professors. So as you went up in the rank, the gender pay gap was even larger. And so it actually was the adjusted salary of a female full professor was comparable to that of a male associate professor. So like a whole level difference, but the woman full professor would be paid the same as the male associate professor. And interestingly, radiology was the only specialty where the adjusted salary of men did not exceed that of women. So that really makes a big difference overall, especially when it's compounded. So over a simulated 40-year career, women physicians are estimated to earn $2 million less than men after adjustment for factors that may otherwise be explained in differences of income, such as hours worked, clinical revenue, practice type, and specialty. And women physicians are more likely to work part-time or cut back at work compared to male physicians. But even with that adjustment, there's still this vast difference in compensation for women compared to men. Oh, and someone asks why that Asian women may close the gap compared to white men. Honestly, the study didn't really go into the why on that. So it was just interesting that that one particular study didn't show the pay gap specifically for Asian women as much. But I can tell you from a personal experience being an Asian woman that I certainly was making less than the male counterpart, where I left a position and there was a white male who was offered the position I had left, and he actually reached out to me. And when I found out how much he was being offered for the position I left, it was $100,000 more than I had been getting paid, which seemed actually really crazy. So why is it so hard to close the gap? So let's talk about some of the causes for the gender pay gap. So women are less likely to men to negotiate an offered salary. We as women are more likely to take what's offered, and if we think it's fair, then we just accept that without pushing back and asking for more. When women do negotiate, we typically ask 30% less than men. So that's something to keep in mind next time you're negotiating. And whatever you think is crazy to ask for, up it by 30%. Women are also 25% less likely than men to ask for a specific amount when negotiating a pay raise. So when we go ask for a pay raise, we may just ask for a raise and then we'll accept whatever we can get, as opposed to asking for a specific number we want and then negotiating based on that number. Women are also much more likely to do uncompensated work. And part of it is coming down from our superiors may ask us to do more, but even those who are under us are more likely to ask us. So if you think about like our nurses and our MAs, they're more likely to ask a women physician to do something that they wouldn't go to a male physician, ask them to do the same thing. And just even in discussions I've had with my colleagues, like, could you imagine like a male physician ever being asked to bring like baked goods into the office? And I mean, I have to say, like, I felt prey to this too. Like in my first job, like I remember baking brownies and bringing into my office, and my, male colleague boss, like I couldn't imagine him ever bringing baked goods in. He may pay for baked goods, but even if he paid for the baked goods, it's not like he would be the one picking them up from the bakery to bring them in. It would probably be like some staff person went to go pick them up. Like, some staff person ordered it, used his credit card to pay for it, and then like went and got it. Like he would not be the one doing any of that work, where like I literally baked brownies in my kitchen and brought them in, right? And, there was nothing that said that I had to do that, but it's just the perception, like people will ask a woman, even a woman physician, to do something that they would never ask a male physician to do. And so why it's really often that we just don't want to appear greedy or ungrateful. And also we think that our hard work will be recognized and rewarded. And unfortunately, often that's really not the case. Generally, physicians were also busy that we're really focused on what we're doing. And even when we're working really hard, others are not necessarily looking to see how hard we're working. And even those who are our bosses or our supervisors or, the division chair or the chair of the department, they don't necessarily see all the things that you're really doing. They're not necessarily noticing, like, quote, the hard work. And there's really usually often different metrics that they're really looking at. It's also that often we want to avoid conflict and just even the discomfort of asking. And this really goes into a lot of the messaging that, again, society really starts these messages when we're really young. And when it comes to messaging, like there are explicit messages and implicit messages. So explicit messages are things that are specifically said out loud that we'll hear. And again, this goes from our childhood and when we're first raised that we start hearing these messages. And so just some examples of things that may have happened in the home. It's like if your mother tells you to find a husband to make a lot of money who can take care of you, like I mentioned in Pride and Prejudice, like, I mean, that is a thing. And, maybe you never heard that from your parents, but there are certainly little girls throughout the United States who still get this messaging. It can also be a little bit more subtle, like, if your father complains about how much your mother is spending on clothes, or complains on how much, your mother returns from the salon and your father says something about how much, her hair costs and how much less his haircut is. And, that's really, pretty true. Like, I actually think it's harder to cut my husband's hair than it really is to cut my hair. I tend to have really long hair, so it's really just getting a trim of the bottom and not necessarily a whole lot of styling that's necessarily done. And yet, my haircut costs 2 to 3 times, well, over 2 times, and generally 3 times what his haircut costs. It might also be things like your mother telling you to ask your father for money. So this was definitely true when I was growing up. Is if I wanted money, if I went to ask my mom, she would always say like, "Oh, you got to go ask your father for money," and there's that messaging that we get money from men, and we get money from our fathers. So let's talk a little bit about implicit messaging, and these are the things that you infer secondary to how you see people behave. And this could be something like your mother defers to your father for all financial decisions. Or whenever your parents shopped or purchased for a large purchase, like a car, it's your father who does all the negotiating. Or perhaps, your mother doesn't even go shopping for those big things, where your father's always making all the big money decisions. Or your father being the one who gave out allowances if you got an allowance. So this was true when I was growing up as well, as so I started getting allowance when I was in middle school. And the idea was I could either use that allowance to buy lunch at school, or I could pack a lunch from home. And then I could save that money from my allowance to do things like, go to the movies with my friends. And so, but I had to actually go ask my dad for my allowance every Sunday. It wasn't just like given to me. It wasn't like put somewhere. Like, I had to go to my dad, and like he would get the money out of his wallet. I couldn't go, like, my mom never gave me out my allowance. It was always my father who gave me out my allowance. And my mom did work when I was growing up, but it was very always just clear that my dad was the head of the household, the breadwinner, the person where money came from. And so when your father's seen as the breadwinner in the family, even if both parents work, that really is that societal messaging of men being good with money, men being the ones with money. And so this is Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty. And these are the Disney princesses I grew up with. And of course, Disney's kind of changed a little bit their story to empower women a little bit more these days. But when we look at these characters, they were all promoted as being beautiful, and their value came from their beauty and their kindness, right? So, and each of these princesses were in need of a man to like rescue them. So with Cinderella, like, Prince Charming came to save her from her stepmother and stepsisters. With Snow White, the hunter had to save her. And with Sleeping Beauty, she needed, a prince to wake her up from the spell that was cast by the wicked fairy. And she couldn't do anything to help herself, per se. Then the other messaging we get is that women aren't good at math. And growing up, actually, like, I was a math and science person. Like, I always leaned towards that way. And but society really has told us to believe that we aren't as good at math, to the point where there are these research studies that show that if you remind a woman of her gender, she actually does worse on a math test. And the interesting thing is, like, so we also have the stereotype that Asians are good at math. And I remember when I was young, specifically being told by, like, other students, "Oh, you're just good at math because you're Chinese." Well, they've actually done a study where they took Asian women, and if they reminded the Asian woman of her ethnicity, she did better on the math test. And if they reminded the Asian woman of her gender, she did worse on the math test. So it just shows how being reminded of, like, society's prejudices or conditions, pre-notions, like, actually affects performance, like true performance in the end, even if it's something that we may not even believe is true, but somehow, like, those society has imparted those beliefs onto us. And it really starts very young. So 75% of second graders already have the bias that numbers are for boys and letters are for girls. And so as women, we're really socialized to take care of others. It's really not the role of women to make money. Women get money from men, their father, their husband, and that women are supposed to use that money to take care of the household. And so if there is money, the idea is that women should be spending on others, right? They should be spending on the household, on their children, on keeping house, and not really necessarily spending it on ourselves. That spending on oneself is indulgent or could be even be considered frivolous. Women are really socialized to be conservative and to be careful with money. When someone actually decides to give us money or pay us, that we need to be careful with it, that, it's shameful to lose it or shameful to spend it on ourselves. So there, there was actually a study done in 2018 that looked at 300 different financial articles, and this was across various countries. So this wasn't just in the United States. And about 90% of female-directed financial articles advise women to cut back on their spending. Most of the articles directed at women were really about how to save money and how to spend less. And 65% of articles even characterize women as splurgers. So even that word splurger, right? That's the idea is like, oh, you're spending more than you should, or you're treating yourself. And even though treating yourself may sound like a good connotation, it's still the idea of like, oh, you're spending where you shouldn't necessarily be. These articles often portray financial planning as overwhelming, stressful, or scary. On the other hand, men are really socialized to be empowered. And so when looking at the articles that were directed to men, they were really more about investing and it really just taught them about like that men are good at acquiring wealth and taking risks. So articles for men really talk more in financial terms and concepts. And the funny thing is that studies actually suggest that women are actually better at making financial decisions than men. So in reality, women are gaslit. Like we are actually gaslit to think that we're not good at something that we actually are generally better at. So there's really been a lot of implicit messaging that's been filtered down through society and really influences us in our lives, even if we kind of cognitively fight against that. Somewhere deep inside us, we still can be affected by it. And so just want to think about, if a male physician like kind of drove up in this new Lamborghini, like what are the things that you would potentially think that you would hear people say? A lot of times you may hear like, oh, he must really be doing well. He must be doing great as practice. Like he must have like a really great bonus. Um, you know, Usually purchase like this really is looked at as a display of wealth and success. But what happens when a woman comes in showing off her new designer bag, right? Like here's a Louis Vuitton bag. Some may say like, oh, she must be doing well, but there are more likely than the Lamborghini thoughts of like, oh, maybe that was a gift from her husband, and there might be also thoughts like, oh, that's a frivolous purchase. I would never waste money like spending so much on a bag, right? A Louis Vuitton bag is considered like more luxurious and maybe unnecessary versus the Lamborghini. I mean, it's equally, if not more so, luxurious and not necessary. Because when you think about it, like these are both examples of spending more money than is needed for the practical purpose, right? So instead of a Lamborghini, you could have a Honda Civic, and you can get a Honda Civic for under 40,000, whereas a Lamborghini could cost even multiple six figures, right? So we're talking about six-figure difference of overspending potentially, whereas a really nice bag, 20, 30, maybe 50,000. I've seen bags for 50,000, but you probably could find a bag that's in six figures, but your typical Louis Vuitton bag is not going to be. It's more of a five-figure type purchase, as opposed to maybe like you could get a nice bag for $100 or $200. But I mean, the level of difference of spending is actually way less than that for a car, and yet it's looked at as being more frivolous. So all that to say is that you are not bad with money. Now, hopefully some of you here actually feel like you're very good with money because you're following things like the White Coat Investor and learning about finances. But if you have this thought that you're bad with money, I want to tell you that you are not bad with money. It's just not surprising that even capable women feel insecure when it comes to managing money. based on everything that we're told from the time we're growing up as being a woman. So I think the historical context is helpful because it gives you a different way to think about like how we're thinking. By looking at societal messaging, it kind of opens an alternative explanation of why we think the way we do. Uh, and answers the questions like, why am I thinking this if it's not really true? So more talk about thoughts. So having a thought does not actually make it true. Like we think our brain is reporting the news, but it's really actually quite biased. Our brain will search for evidence to show any thought that we have is true. And we think our brain is just this reliable observer, but really our brain is more like a witness in a trial that's been paid to testify for one side. It'll change a story to like fit whatever necessary in order to make things make sense in its mind. So if you have a thought that's not true, you'll continue to create evidence and find evidence and see evidence that is true, and you'll push aside all the evidence that's not true. And I mean, you can imagine like if you've talked to someone who's really just strongly believed in whatever they believe, like someone who just absolutely doesn't believe in vaccines or believes vaccines causes autism. Like you can show them all the studies where that was false and the original study that said it was really not rigorously done. But they're still going to hang on to their belief and find like, well, I know this one person who was autistic and they got, vaccinated. Like they'll cherry pick the evidence that supports whatever belief they want to hang on to. But what we can do instead of being so committed to a belief is really become an observer of our thoughts. So a belief is just a thought that we thought over and over again. And it takes work, but we can actually change those thoughts and beliefs. And so what I want to ask you is like, what is your default money thought? If I asked you like, how do you think or feel about managing money? And sometimes the feeling will actually come first. Like if I asked you like, how do you like managing your own money? If your first thought is like, anxiety or being nervous, you know, sit back and think like, well, what am I thinking that's causing that anxiety? Am I thinking that, oh, I don't really know what I'm doing, that I'm worried that I'm going to lose money, that I'm not a good caretaker of the money? Like find that thought for you, and then you can actually kind of displace that thought with something that you can actually believe. So if you don't like that default thought, find a better thought that you can believe. And it does take some effort to actually learn that new thought. But, instead of like, I don't know how to manage money, it's like, I can learn how to manage money, right? I'm a smart, capable woman. I've become a physician. I've learned really hard things. And the practice of medicine is way harder than simply managing personal finances. And if you can really get yourself to the place of like, I might not know a lot now, but I can learn. I learned how to manage patients. I didn't know that when I started. I can learn how to manage money. And just practicing those new thoughts, then you can eventually get to a place where you feel confident. Just like, when you're a med student or when you first became an intern or a resident, like you didn't feel confident then about practicing medicine. But now as attending, the more years you've practiced, the more confident you are. And so the same thing can be said true whenever you're learning anything new. And of course, when you're learning manage money, it's, in the beginning, you're not going to feel as confident, but you can start having those thoughts like, I can learn this. Like, I am able to do this. I can do this well. And as you do more and more, you'll start to feel that confidence and be able to manage. So the thought I would like every woman physician to have is I can create financial freedom for myself and my family. So, because it's really not about the money, it's about having options, it's about maintaining autonomy, it's about building security, and it's about getting to be more of who you truly are. So money is really a tool. Money's not good or bad intrinsically. Money just lets us be more of who we are. And so if we're good people, money just allows us to be even better, right? By having more money in the hands of good people, then more good can be done in this world. And just some resources I like to share. So The Psychology of Money is one of my favorite money books to recommend to people. It's by Morgan Housel. It's also available as an audiobook. And, it does go a bit into personal finance, but that's kind of like almost the last chapter. What he really does is really talk about the psychology of money and really frame why, we do the things we do, much like I talked in this presentation as well. And then Take Back Your Brain by Cara Loventhal. So she's a life coach. She trained at the Life Coach School, which is also where I first certified as a life coach. And I think her book is really great in terms of the looking at thoughts, deconstructing your thoughts, being able to come up with new thoughts that you want to believe and latter thoughts to get you there. And she does have a chapter specifically about money in the book as well. And some of the material I presented today actually come from that book. I also host the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. So I've got episodes that are, strictly just about personal finance or investing, but other episodes that go over money mindset, as well as just mindset things and exercise you can do to increase happiness in our lives. And then I just want to share my contact information. If you want to reach out to me anytime after this presentation, you've got my email here. You can learn more about me on my website, growyourwealthymindset.com. I'm on social media. I post mostly on Facebook, but you can find me on Instagram. I do have a number of videos I've made on YouTube, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. All right, so I'm just seeing here at the end. All right, so someone wrote, despite having good net worth and being good at managing money, I have an immigrant scarcity mentality about money. My default is that I won't have enough to take care of my special needs kids and that I need to keep saving and not spending. So you're not alone in this. And that's very common for a lot of people of when is enough? And is there ever going to be enough, right? So my father-in-law, unfortunately, he's developed dementia somewhat early, and he's actually otherwise very healthy. So his memory care facility is $10,000 a month, and that's typically cost for nursing home care these days. But in his case, he's physically really well, and you can live with dementia a long time. And luckily, he has the financial means that we don't he himself can support his memory care facility, but it actually made me think a lot of oh, well, if what if my husband needs to do that, and then that's $120,000 today's dollars a year. Well, that's more than we typically live on even now. So do I need to have more and able to safely retire, right? So in the end, it's a balance. You want to build to live life now and enjoy life now while you're saving and investing for the future. And so you don't want to give up the joys that you have now. And some things that bring you joy actually don't necessarily have to cost a lot of money. Time spent with your family, quality time, that doesn't necessarily need to cost a lot of money, but can bring you a lot of joy. So you want to, I think, one thing is focus and look at what your values are and where you want to put your values, and then spend towards those values.
Awesome. I've got a couple of the comments and questions that have come up. I'll share some of those. And this is kind of along with what you were already talking about, but someone said, I'm good at managing. I'm scared I don't have enough. I think that's a super common story that we hear a lot at White Coat Investor. I think women especially feel that, how do I know? How do I know when I have enough? So, you already touched on that, but I think that's just, more evidence that it is a thing on a lot of our minds.
It is. And so one thing I like to do for my own, peace of mind is I run Monte Carlo simulations multiple times to be and what it shows is often the portfolio is not going to run out. It's actually going to be worth millions and millions more than I will never end up spending, right? So most of the time, things work out really well. And, years where it's down and the market's not returning and maybe the investments aren't doing well, maybe that's the year that we just don't travel, right? And we can shrink down to living on less while investments aren't doing well. And other years where investments are doing well, we travel more. So, when we talk about the 4% withdrawal rates, yeah, but you can adjust that depending on what's going on in your life, during retirement.
Yeah, and a question that just came up: do we still feel the 4% rule holds for retirement? I read the inventor of the rule spends more than 4%.
Yeah. So the 4% rule is based on the Trinity study. And so there are people who say like, oh, especially if you retire early, you want to do less, like 3.5%. And other people say like 4% is more than enough. So what the Trinity study is basically that 90% of the time, if you had a portfolio of, I think it was like 75% stocks or no, at least 50% stocks, I can't quite remember all the specific measures, that your portfolio was 9% chance of lasting for 30 years. But, that's why I talked about doing Monte Carlo simulations, is that it's like, okay, when we talk about research, we always talk about the confidence interval and like, what is the likelihood it's true? And we don't we don't look for something to be 100% true before we accept if it's true. If it's 95% true, we look at the confidence ratio. And so that's when looking at the confidence ratio is, depends on you might be able to spend more. And again, there are actually multiple different ways of drawing down on your portfolio that can make it help, last longer or not. So, and actually, I think I have a podcast episode actually just dedicated to that. But yeah, so I think in general, like the 4% rule probably, does it apply? Well, the biggest, the two biggest risks I would say is inflation and what kind of inflationary environment there is, and then the sequence of returns risk. So if you retire and the next 5 years, every year the market's down, like you're going to be in a more precarious position than if you retire and the market's doing great for the first 5 years. And then knowing that, it's like, how do you mitigate that? Well, one way to mitigate that is just to have a lot more cash in the beginning before you retire, so that you don't have to sell stocks if the market goes down, because you just have more of a cash base. And then depending on how the market is, you may be able to spend more than 4%. Years the market's really up, those are the years that you can certainly spend more than 4%. Years the market's down, you may want to limit yourself to 4% or 3.5%.
For sure.
But it's really more of a fluidity. It's not really like a direct 4%.
Yeah, that's definitely, I agree with that. And I think the 4% rule is a really safe starting spot. And, personal finance is so personal. And so there's a big component to figuring out what your life looks like, what your spending habits are, and then adjusting accordingly, for sure. Oh, do you know, on one of the studies that you referenced, is there any explanation about why the Asian women were making closer to what white men made?
Yeah, that wasn't like fully explained. I mean, because basically they just looked at the numbers and that's what it came out to be. It could be possibly that there were just not necessarily that many Asian women in the study. And so if if you don't have that many and those few just negotiated well, that might be the case. I didn't necessarily look back at that study right before I did this presentation, so I can't remember everything in that publication.
Great. Let's see. Oh, someone's just making a comment. This is awesome, worth sharing. My mom was widowed in her 40s and really struggled with how to manage her money. I'm so proud that I can take care of my financial security. Yes, right. So awesome. That's what we're all doing here, is hoping to get that security. Okay. How often do you recommend an employed physician negotiate or renegotiate their salary? Do we know how often men do it?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure how often men do it. And I think it depends on your situation, right? So it's going to be different in an academic setting versus a private practice setting. A lot of times in private practice, it's going to be somewhat based on your collections at some point, or how much money you're bringing in. And if you know you're bringing in more money or you're using less resources, then certainly that is the time to go back and negotiate. If it's a situation for your partner, you'll probably know a lot more about the financials. In an academic situation, it's going to depend a lot on what your chair prioritizes and and also what you're looking to get. So, sometimes negotiating isn't necessarily even about negotiating more income. It could be about negotiating more time to do research, or more admin time, or more vacation time, or being paid to be part of different committees, as opposed to oftentimes we're like working for free for a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Continuing to get better at advocating for ourselves for definitely.
And talking about money and talking with our colleagues about money. Like I saw
Yeah.
some posts in Facebook recently where like someone was appalled that like, one of her male colleagues had said like, oh, like, am I being underpaid? I'm only being paid this much. And he was a newer hire and he was being paid more than she was. And so, she was like, I can't believe he would talk to me. And a lot of other people were posting, it's like, no, you should be thanking him because now you know you're being underpaid and it is time for you to go and negotiate for more.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm a big advocate for saying what you make, say it out loud. So we all have the same, we know it and we can go negotiate for ourselves.
Right. And people have said like, oh, but my contract says I can't talk about what we make. Like there's actually, I believe, a federal law that you can't actually stop people from talking about their compensation. And the reason why our employers don't want their employees talking about compensation is because generally that means that someone's going to find out they make less and go negotiate for more, right? That's why employers don't want it, and that's why we should be talking about it.
Definitely. Do you have a perspective on whether it's better to own property versus stocks for retirement?
And that all depends, right? So with property, you want positive cash flow. And positive cash flow means that you're making money, not just after paying the mortgage, but after everything, the maintenance, the downtime, the turnover. And so that's what a lot of times people forget to actually include all that, right? All property is going to need, at some point, furnace, AC, roof, like will need to be replaced. And you've got to actually account for that. If you can get that positive cash flow, one thing, I like about real estate is that once you have if you really have that equity built in, that positive cash flow coming in, then you hold the asset and you have income without selling the asset. Whereas with stocks, a lot of times it's appreciating. It's not necessarily throwing off a lot of dividends. So you end up having to sell the stock in order to actually get cash from it. But it all, with real estate, it really depends on what you bought the property at and, what you can get out of it. With stocks, what I'm really saying is low cost index funds. What you have is now you have a huge diversification, which is harder with real estate to have the same kind of diversification.
For sure. Let's see. I think we've got one more. Any studies that you're familiar with on women owning their own businesses versus men owning their businesses? This is a female dentist who owns her own business, not an employee. And often she wonders if it's equalized. Do you know anything about that?
So I can't say I have a specific study to point to, but my guess is that most businesses are still owned by men, that there are much less women entrepreneurs compared to male entrepreneurs.
Amazing. Okay. Okay, one more question. How do you respond when someone questions your purchases?
I need a little bit more context. So in my household, if I want to buy something, my husband doesn't really get to say no.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm unlikely to make an expensive purchase without talking to him, and he the same. I've been with my spouse actually since I was 17, he was 18, so we've really grown up together through, in terms of going through like money and finances we both started with nothing essentially and built it together.
Yeah, I think she said she was referencing the part of your presentation about where the bag at the office, you have your new Louis bag and somebody might have a comment about it or something like that. Do you have any insight on, or a good advice on how you might respond to something like that?
I think it all depends on how you want to respond. So if you're someone who loves to have nice things, and this is something you bought for yourself, I would just own it and be like, no, this was a gift for myself because I love feeling luxurious, and this makes me feel luxurious, and I feel good when I have this.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, like I'm doing it for me. I'm not doing it for anyone else. And that's the other thing about society is like in Western society and in American society, like people don't talk about money. Instead, they show off their wealth by what they have. And a lot of times you may see someone, they look successful and rich, and yet really they're in a lot of debt and they really don't have much high net worth, right? They have the big house and the big car and their kids all go to private school. But in the end, they have no actual wealth, whereas the person with a more modest house and their kids going to public school may be, worth 10, $20 million. You have no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think as we've talked about so many times in this community, in the white coat community at large, we are all preaching this message of the financial stability is such a game-changing thing to your peace of mind and the way that you can show up in the world. And then if somebody has something to say, if I've saved for my retirement and I've done everything that I need to do, my ducks are in a row and I've got my beautiful new bag and someone has something to say about it, I'm not worried because I get to spend my money how I want because I've already taken care of everything else. And it's such a beautiful way to live. It's a beautiful way to feel. So let's see, one more. Why do you think as professional women, we don't talk about money or investment opportunities with each other? I feel we miss so many opportunities to invest around us, especially in medicine as income earners.
Yeah, I think it just goes with part of the tabooness of talking about money. And the thing is, it's not taboo for men to talk about investments with men. It's taboo for women to talk about money. And that's why, I brought all this historical context tonight, because women are historically given money to take care of, to manage the household, but not given money to invest and make more money from it. And so there is that just societal pressure awareness or taboo of like women not talking about investments. And it does kind of hold us back. And so we just need to change that by starting to talk about it.
Absolutely. That's what we're doing, right? That's the entire point of what we're trying to create here is a space to feel safe, to talk and to learn and not be uncomfortable with what we don't already know and break down those discomforts or those barriers around having those open, honest conversations. So, amen and hallelujah to all of that. I think we made it through all of our questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I hope that, you'll take some of the information I present tonight and really think about your own thoughts about money, your own stories that you've been telling yourself, and ask if those stories are serving you and what you want to change from it and how do you want to think and feel about money, and know that that is available. Whatever you want to think and feel about money, that's available to you. I mean, it takes work, but, just starting to break down like, I think or feel this way because I saw this growing up. My parents said this growing up, but I don't have to take that to be my current reality.
Absolutely. Amazing. Thank you so much. I think that this has given all of us a lot to think about. I hope that everybody can pull some pieces of this that resonates with them and start to make some changes or start learning some new things, breaking down some of the fears or misunderstandings. So huge thank you to you, Elisa. We really appreciate your time tonight. And let's see, I will just wrap everything up here. Don't forget about grabbing your ticket to WCI Con if you want to join us. Tomorrow's your last day for $300 off. You don't need a fancy code or anything like that. Just head to the website. Prices will be accurate. whitecoatinvestor.com/WCICon, WCICON. And then finally, if you want to enter our drawing tonight, jump over to Facebook and give us some feedback about what we can do to improve the Few experience for you. This is your community. We want it to serve you. So tell us whatever you want. It can be something about what kind of guests you want. If you have a specific person you'd like to hear from, topics you want us to cover, changes to the format, anything else that you can think of, just let us know. And if you are not a Facebooker, feel free to send us an email, few@whitecoatinvestor.com, and we will be sure to get you entered that way. So that's everything for tonight. Thank you all for being here. We just love this community. We love being a part of this, and it's always wonderful to see so many of you here. And we will see you all in 2026. Have a wonderful fall and watch your emails for updates about what's coming next year. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.